Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Hi, Nelda. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for spending some time of your precious day to learn a little bit more about ketogenic metabolic therapies from an expert in the field. I am beyond thrilled to have Franziska joining us today, and I would love to introduce her for those of you that are not already familiar with her work. But she is an amazing inspiration, a great resource. So she is a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist with a passion for health. Um, After years in clinical practice and consulting, she now serves as a Medical Science Liaison at Keto-Mojo, where she supports healthcare professionals and researchers in the field of ketogenic metabolic therapy. She also writes articles and develops courses on ketogenic and low-carb lifestyles with a focus on making the content clear, practical, and easy to implement. So I am excited for this meeting, and I'm very thankful, Franziska, for your willingness to join us today, share a little bit about your expertise, insights, knowledge from the wealth of experience. I personally read all of your articles on the Keto-Mojo website, and I find them extremely informative and helpful. So I'm sure the audience here today is gonna enjoy what you have to share with us. And we're going to go over the Keto-Mojo testing device and the different measurements that we can do with it and the benefits of tracking CGM, GKI, in addition to just ketones, which will hopefully give a little bit more understanding for people to grasp the idea of that more advanced tracking benefits, right? Deeper and more accurate understanding of metabolic health. And so we're going to also have some time for questions. So those of you that would love to ask a question, please just keep it, write it down or have it ready. And then towards the end of the meeting, we'll be together for an hour. We're going to have some time to open up for questions. And without further ado, Franziska, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm really speechless a little bit, and it's also great to see so many turnouts. I could see people coming in, so I'm very happy that we have a number of people here to learn, and I'm really very, very grateful to be here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Make sure you can all see. Never know what to do with people going up there. Is that good? Can you see my screen pretty well? Okay, great. Okay. Okay, but can I advance my screen is the question. Yes. Go back one. Okay. Yes, I am Franziska Spritzler. She gave me a wonderful introduction. I don't think she missed anything at all. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to be talking about ketone, glucose, and GKI testing and all of the things that Donica said. But I'd first like to just kind of go over all the things we'll be discussing. We're going to compare different ketone testing methods, learn how ketone and GKI, the glucose ketone index, monitoring can support brain health, explore target ketone and GKI ranges for mental health conditions, get tips on when and how to test ketones and glucose, and briefly review our MyMojoHealth app for easy tracking of your data. So before we start talking about ketones, I'm just going to briefly review nutritional ketosis. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but when you cut way back on carbohydrates, your glucagon levels go down and your insulin levels go down. And when those hormones are very low, your fat cells, they give up fatty acids into the bloodstream. Those are carried to the liver. And over time, the byproducts of beta oxidation build up, and then ketones are produced from that. And over the course of the next few days, ketones enter the bloodstream and get to a level where we say you're in nutritional ketosis. The first few days, you're not really using the ketones very efficiently, but by about day 4 on, depends on the person, you will be using ketones and fats as your main fuel in place of glucose. Now, why is ketosis beneficial? Why are ketones beneficial? A number of reasons. First of all, it's an altered fuel source. I just mentioned that, once you're in a state of nutritional ketosis, you are using fats and ketones as your main fuels. And this is beneficial for a number of reasons, including better brain health, but it also allows you to switch between fuel sources more readily once you become keto adapted. No one is using 100% glucose at all times or 100% fat and ketones at all times. It's always a mix. Of course, when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're going to mainly be using fats and ketones, but you will be able to switch between using that and using glucose when needed more easily. You just become more metabolically flexible. Also, over the long term, ketosis leads to what's known as mitochondrial biogenesis. So this is a beautiful picture of a mitochondrion here on the side. Mitochondria are often called the powerhouse of the cells. They do a lot of other important things. They're involved in cell signaling and autophagy, which is clearing away old or non-functional portions of the cell. But in mitochondrial biogenesis, this increases both the number and the resiliency of mitochondria. So they function better and you're able to produce energy better from your high-fat diet. And these adaptations lead to a lot of improvements system-wide. So one of them is reducing inflammation. Inflammation is at the root cause of so many diseases. It's certainly involved in every chronic disease that I can think of, including mental health conditions. And being in ketosis and having ketones, particularly one specific ketone, beta-hydroxybutyrate, present, helps to lower inflammation. It also improves insulin sensitivity. So I mentioned that when you cut way back on carbohydrates, your insulin levels go down. So you're in a state of low insulin, but you also become more sensitive to the insulin. So you need less, and your overall health improves in a low insulin environment. And then there's enhanced neuroprotection for the brain. There's less oxidative stress. So there's the brain functions better. People who go on ketogenic diets often notice, even if they don't have mental health issues, that they are clearer thinking. They don't have the brain fog they used to have. And the neuroprotection is also due to increased levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. So for all of these reasons, being in ketosis is beneficial. It's beneficial, you adapt to it pretty quickly, and as long as you're in that metabolic state, you can reap all of these benefits. So if you are following a well-formulated ketogenic diet that is very low in carbohydrates, it has plenty of fat, healthy fats, and is moderate in protein, and is very low in inflammatory foods, very low in processed foods, do you really need to test ketones? Well, if you are following ketogenic metabolic therapy for the benefits of being in ketosis, then you want to make sure you're actually in ketosis. And the only way to know for sure is to test. Testing verifies that you have achieved ketosis and also the level of ketosis that you're at, because there's a wide range of ketosis. It's not just like you're in it or you're not. There's a pretty wide range, and I'll talk about it a little bit. I'll just tell you now. When we're talking about blood ketones, it goes all the way from 0.5 millimole per liter to 5 millimole per liter. That's a large range, and really people feel their best at different points in that range. So by testing, you can see what range you're at and figure out what you need to do to stay there. If you're not in ketosis or at the level that you want to be at, then you can see whether maybe you need to cut back on carbs a little more or change your eating window or do something else. But testing gives you that information. So now I'm going to talk about different ways to test ketones. There are 3 ketone bodies or ketones. The first one is acetoacetate. This is produced first in the liver. It's sometimes called the parent ketone because of that. And this one is measured in the urine. Now, acetoacetate can be converted into one of the other ketones. It can spontaneously convert into acetone, and this is a volatile ketone that is very quickly excreted on the breath, so we measure that in the breath. Acetoacetate can also be converted enzymatically to beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB for short. This is the ketone that I mentioned before that we measure in the blood. And acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate can be converted back and forth into each other. So it can leave the liver, acetoacetate converts into beta-hydroxybutyrate, and throughout the bloodstream, it can be beta-hydroxybutyrate until it gets to cells outside the liver. And then in order to go through the energy production TCA cycle, it's actually converted back into acetoacetate. So these can be converted back and forth into each other, but once acetoacetate is converted to acetone, that's it. It leaves the body in the breath and it won't come back. So what's the right test? Is it testing your urine, your breath, or your blood? Well, it depends. Depends on a number of things, including how accurate you need to know your ketone levels to be. But we're going to talk about all three of them. So first, let's go through urine testing. So acetoacetate is the ketone found in the urine. That's measured in milligrams per deciliter. It's very easy to do. You simply either urinate into a cup and dip a dipstick in, or you can urinate right onto the dipstick. And very quickly, the color will change to reflect the level of ketosis. And you can see here the different levels, anywhere from negative to large, and the colors that correspond to those levels. So a lot of advantages to testing urine ketones. First, it's very easy to teach and perform. As long as you have urine in the dipstick, you can do it very quickly. It's inexpensive. The strips are very inexpensive. It's non-invasive, and it's pain-free. On the downside, it's highly influenced by hydration status. So if you are dehydrated, you can see a darker color than your true ketone level. But even more importantly is that after keto adaptation, you can have false negatives. And that's because as your body becomes adapted, keto adapted, very little is lost in the urine. Most of that acetoacetate is converted into beta-hydroxybutyrate. So it's no longer in your urine. So you can be in a moderate to deep level of ketosis and see only a faint color on the strip. So it's not going to give you your true color or your true indication of ketosis after you've become keto adapted. It has not been used reliably in clinical trials to monitor ketosis. And it's also subjective and semi-quantitative. If you look back at the colors, you can look and say, okay, is that color pink or is it dark pink or faint pink? It's really a judgment call. So it's hard to tell exactly what level you're at. And these strips were not designed for people who are following a ketogenic metabolic intervention. They're designed to detect ketoacidosis, which is a very serious condition that occurs. It's very, very high ketone levels, really only occurs in people who don't have adequate insulin. And that would be people with type 1 diabetes who have not taken their insulin. It's not that the ketogenic diet causes them to go into ketosis. It's that they don't have insulin. Many, many people with type 1 diabetes, unfortunately, go into ketoacidosis eating all kinds of diets or even not eating at all. It's a condition of no insulin on board to take care of the metabolism. So that's what these strips are for. They're designed to detect ketoacidosis. For all those reasons, they're really not a good fit for monitoring ketosis on a ketogenic lifestyle. The next way to test is acetone in the breath. And here you can test with a device that you can use at home. You blow into it for several seconds. The manufacturer specifies, but it's usually about 10 seconds or so. You have to breathe into it a specific way, and then you will get a reading. And breath acetone is measured in parts per million, and that's 1 molecule of acetone for every 1 million molecules of air. That's what ppm stands for. And you can see the ranges here. This is what I found in the scientific literature in all of the studies. There's actually a lot of overlap. And in some cases, people were testing over 100 ppm and were not in diabetic ketoacidosis. In other cases, ketoacidosis happened at lower levels. So that's still not 100% consistent. But most of the time when you're testing on these home devices, they don't give you the ppm. They give you something called an ACE, or an acetone concentration estimate. And this is supposed to estimate the volatile compound, the acetone, as roughly equivalent to 1/8 per 0.1 millimole per liter in the blood of beta hydroxybutyrate. So for instance, if you tested and you got an ACE reading of 6, that would roughly correspond to a blood ketone rating of 0.6 millimole per liter. But the correspondence can vary significantly, and it hasn't really been established to be that accurate in trials when you look at both. So just, that's something important to know, I think. And as far as the advantages of testing breath, it is a one-time upfront purchase for the device, the breathalyzer. They're not inexpensive. They're usually $200 or more, but it's only a one-time expense. So you don't need to purchase strips. You don't need to purchase any supplies. The other nice thing about it is you can test as many times as you want per day, and it won't cost you any more than if you test once per day. So for people who'd like to test frequently, it's very appealing. It's also non-invasive and pain-free. The disadvantages are that it can be influenced by breathing technique. You do need to breathe in for a certain number of seconds in a steady way, and sometimes you have to hold your breath. So for very young children or older adults, or certainly anyone with breathing problems, it's not a good method or way of testing. Also, based on the available technology today, which are metal oxide sensors, also known as MOX or MOS sensors, you can get false positives due to cross sensitivities and degradation of the sensor over time, which could be in either direction. So I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more. So acetone is a volatile organic compound that is found in the breath, but it's not the only one. There's also hydrogen and alcohol and others. And the sensor on the breathalyzer can sometimes misinterpret these other organic compounds as acetone and give you a falsely high reading. So it can look like you're in a very high level of ketosis when you're not. And you can see all of the things here, the foods and beverages and even things like smoking, these behaviors like that can affect the reading in a false way. So sometimes, if it's just something like mint tea or green tea, waiting an hour or so afterwards is fine, you can test. But other times, your body can actually produce these compounds like a day later, and it can affect the reading. So that's the cross sensitivity. And the other problem is that contamination leads to the degradation of the sensor over time. And it can be in either direction. Either the sensor will give you a reading that's higher than your level of ketosis or lower, but you won't have any notification of this. It'll just be working just fine, and then it won't, and you won't get any kind of error signal. So breath acetone is very appealing for a number of reasons, but the current technology right now, it definitely has some drawbacks for accurate measurement. And then there's beta hydroxybutyrate testing, which is blood ketone testing. This one does require a finger stick. So you got to poke your finger and draw blood, and then you insert the strip into the meter and touch that strip, the end of the strip, to your finger and collect the blood. And within a few seconds, you will have a reading of your ketone level. I mentioned before the range for nutritional ketosis is about 0.5 to 5 millimole per liter. The other term that is being used now sometimes is euketonemia, and that translates to good or beneficial levels of ketones in the blood. That term was coined by Dr. Jeff Volek a couple of years ago. He used it in a few lectures that I saw that he gave, and he's used it in papers as well. So either nutritional ketosis or euketonemia, and you get that level by measuring the beta hydroxybutyrate level in the blood. So the benefits of testing blood are that it is the gold standard for ketone testing. It is established as the most reliable, the most accurate way to measure. It's been used in countless clinical trials, and it does reflect your real-time metabolic state. You test and you can see exactly what it is. It's also relatively affordable, and I'm using the term relatively because I know that everyone, what one person considers affordable may not be the same for another, and also it will depend on how often you test. The disadvantages are that it does require a minimally invasive and minimally painful finger stick. And I realize that it is also subjective, that Some people may find it very invasive to poke their finger and see blood, or they may find it painful. I do have to say that compared to the older needles or lancets that, from 10, 15 years ago, the ones of today are much, much thinner and do not hurt as much. But I will concede that some people will still find it a little bit painful. And then the recurring cost per strip. If you're testing once a day, or if you're testing less than that, I think it's reasonable. If you're testing multiple times a day, I do think it can get quite expensive. And some people do like to test several times a day. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to give you some tips for testing blood ketones. First, choose the right finger. Usually the best ones are either your ring finger or your middle finger, and test on the sides, not on the pads, because they're much less sensitive. Also, warm hands first. This is really important to get the blood flowing. I have been at several conferences where I've tested people's blood, and sometimes the conferences are kept very, very cold, and it's difficult to get the blood flowing. So rub the hands together, or put them under hot water or warm water, and then dry off before you test. And also adjust your lancet device. So you want the lowest depth setting that still gets enough blood. The lowest depth setting, 1 or 2, is probably not enough for most people, and you really won't get much blood. I would say 3 or 4 or 5. 4 is what my personal preference is. It really still doesn't hurt. I think people get concerned. They're like, I want the lowest. But you really want it to be blood, and it will actually work much better if you do it that way. Also, use a fresh lancet each time. The dull ones hurt more, and it's just more hygienic to always use a fresh lancet. And don't squeeze too hard. Just milk your finger gently until you see that it's a dark color, and then you'll be primed to take your reading with the lancet. Don't squeeze too hard though. And then once you have poked your finger, hold the strip at a diagonal, and that way the lancet, I'm sorry, not the lancet, the strip will automatically kind of just suck up the blood. You don't have to shove it in there. It'll automatically just swoop it up, and it's pretty quick too. And then keep your supplies clean and handy. So have all of your strips available and open when you're ready to use them. And any kind of tissues that you want, and your sharps container, just have everything available. And if you're testing often, especially, this is important to rotate fingers. Don't use the same finger over and over. You can build up calluses. So rotate your fingers, rotate different hands. And those are my tips for testing. And then my tips for hang on, here we go. For making sure that you get accurate readings are to always wash and dry your hands. It's not just sugar, and I think we're used to always saying, oh, don't have anything sweet on your hands when you're testing glucose. But other things can also affect ketone readings. So just make sure your hands are clean, get in the habit of washing and drying your hands before you test. Also, temperature and humidity can affect the readings, and this is the meter, not just the strips. You definitely want to store the strips in a cool, dry place, but also the meter. So in very hot and humid conditions, you may not get an accurate reading. As far as storing the strips, the Keto-Mojo strips, we now have them packaged individually, so this isn't a problem. But in the past, we had them in a container that you open up, and some other brands have them in a container. And it makes it easy because you don't have to open the strips each time. But the strips, all the strips you're not using, keep getting exposed to air every time, and that can cause a faster degradation of the strips. Also check the expiration dates, because if the strips are expired, there's no guarantee that they're accurate. They might be, but I wouldn't place any confidence in it being an accurate reading. So just make sure you're always looking at your expiration dates. And then finally, improper handling. So either dropping the meter or slamming it down if you don't like the reading. Don't do that. Treat the meter like the important, valuable device it is if you want it to function well for a long period of time. Okay, now I'm going to briefly go over the glucose ketone index, or GKI. So this is just a simple ratio of glucose to beta hydroxybutyrate, the blood ketone. And it's calculated by dividing the glucose by the BHB level. But if you test in the US, which I'm assuming most people here are from the US, but maybe you're not. In the US, everyone measures blood glucose in milligrams per deciliter. So we need it to be in millimole per liter because ketones are millimole per liter. It needs to be like units. So if you are testing with a milligram per deciliter meter, you would need to divide that number by 18 before dividing it by the ketone value. Now, if you use the MyMojoHealth app, it'll automatically calculate that GKI for you. It won't be on your meter though. If you use a meter, our GKI meter, which is used in Europe and South Africa and a few other areas that measure in millimole, then you will get the GKI actually on your meter. But if you're using it in the US, you will just see it on the app, but you won't see it on the meter itself. So the GKI, as I said, is that ratio of blood glucose to beta hydroxybutyrate, and it was originally developed for monitoring metabolic or ketogenic metabolic therapy in people undergoing treatment for brain cancer, glioblastoma. So brain cancer cells readily use glucose to grow. They can't use any other fuel. They can only ferment glucose in the cell, in the cytosol, and can't use ketones at all. Healthy cells in the brain can use ketones. So by changing the fuel source to mainly provide ketones, we can give the healthy portions of the brain fuel it can use and starve the cancer cells of glucose. And now this GKI is also being used in other areas, including neurology and psychiatry, because people with neurological conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and also people with mental health conditions, tend to have glucose hypometabolism where they don't use glucose effectively, but their brains can use ketones very effectively. So the lower the GKI, the deeper the ketosis is, because you're using more ketones in relationship to glucose. So I'm going to briefly review some ranges, some goal ranges for blood glucose, ketones, and GKI. But I do have some caveats. All of the recommendations are based on studies that I have read and found, and also some advice from clinical practitioners who are using this in therapy. But personalization is really key. Everyone is different. Even though I say this is the ketone level that you might feel best at, you actually might be getting these therapeutic benefits at a lower level. And then GKI targets are based on blood glucose and BHB values that are measured consecutively. They need to be measured at the same time in order to get that ratio. The great thing is, if you prick your finger once, you can use two different strips, a glucose strip and a ketone strip, to collect them one after the other. You don't have to poke your finger twice. You also want to make sure you're measuring at least 3 hours after eating so there's no interference from food. So here are the goal ranges, and I just put on a few mental health conditions. There are others, but the most common ones: bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and schizoaffective disorder. Fasting or pre-meal blood glucose, 70 to 99 milligrams per deciliter. That's considered an acceptable range and a goal range. You may want to keep your blood glucose in the fasting state much lower than 99. I hear you. I feel the same way. But that is still an acceptable range. It's known as euglycemia for that counterpoint to euketonemia. Beta hydroxybutyrate between 1.5 and 5 millimole per liter. So this is higher than the range. The whole range of nutritional ketosis is 0.5 to 5. Generally speaking, people with mental health conditions usually want to have their ketones a little higher than that low level of ketosis, so 1.5 to 5. But as I said, some people may get benefits at lower levels than this. I also want to point out that people with bipolar disorder may actually start to feel manic when ketone levels are too high. So I'm saying 1.5 to 5, that's a broad range. Sometimes people with bipolar disorder, especially at the beginning, may want to stay somewhere between about 1.5 and to 2.5 or 3 and not go much higher than that. It's very individual, and that's why testing is important and really taking stock of how you feel so that you can, kind of correct before it gets to a point where it can affect you negatively. And then the GKI recommendation 1 to 3, I would say 3 is pretty doable. 1 is very rare, but some people just tend to produce more ketones and have a lower glucose naturally and are able to stay around 1. We say for brain cancer, stay less than 2, somewhere between 1 and 2. I know that Lori Calabrese, even though her one of her studies is listed here as a reference, yes, a lower GKI is great, but she just recommends if people can get under 6, it can be beneficial and they can still get into remission. So I'm saying absolute goal 1 to 3, that's a great goal. But if you're getting a GKI of 4, 5, or 6, you may still get a lot of benefit. And it's still much lower than a person who is not undergoing ketogenic metabolic therapy. And then, of course, always look at medications. I do think it's important if you are taking medication to work with a psychiatrist or someone who can adjust medications for you and monitor your therapy. Okay, so testing and tracking your readings. Best times to test are either fasted or several hours after eating. So testing in the morning while you're fasted after an overnight fast is great. That overnight fast may be a long time depending on when you plan to get up in the morning and when you ate the night before. But no matter what, you want to wait a little while before, not just jump out of bed and test right away. And that's because in the early morning hours, your body secretes hormones, 2 specific ones, glucagon and glucagon is one, but one of the big ones is cortisol, and the other one is growth hormone, and glucagon as well is a third. All of those can raise your blood glucose. It's kind of getting you ready to start the day. But when it does that, that causes your body to secrete insulin, and that lowers ketone levels. So if you get up and test first thing in the morning, you may see lower blood ketone levels and higher blood glucose levels than you'd like to see. So the way around that is to wait anywhere from about half an hour to 2 hours or more. And it's going to vary from person to person when the effects of the cortisol and the growth hormone leave your body. What you can do is you can test 3 days in a row at different time points to find out. Generally speaking, I say that people who are more insulin resistant need to wait a little bit longer, but it does vary. So if you test 3 days in a row, once half an hour after you get up, again, an hour after you get up, and then 2 or more hours afterwards, test both your blood glucose and ketones. Then you can start to see the pattern of when those effects of the hormones leave your system. And then you'll know when's the best time for you to test around that time. You don't have to test 3 times every day, just once after you've discovered what works best for you in terms of not seeing that rise in blood glucose and decreasing ketones. And also testing at the same time every day and keeping to the same routine is best for consistency. And then testing before lunch or dinner can also be helpful. I've always found that people tend to have their highest ketone levels right before dinner, assuming they haven't had a snack. So if they eat lunch around 12 or 1, and then they test around 5 in the evening or 6 before they eat dinner, that's when ketone levels are generally the highest. But definitely wait at least 3 hours after eating. You don't want any food to affect the reading in both the blood glucose or ketones. And again, staying consistent is best if you can. If you have a very irregular routine, that's not always possible, but being as consistent as you can with timing is good. You can also test for responses to specific foods, even if they're ketogenic. So I assume that everyone is, that's following ketogenic therapy is steering clear of any high carb foods and certainly sugar and starches. But even some keto-friendly foods can cause problems for some people and can raise their blood glucose or lower their ketones. And I'm thinking about things like dairy or nuts or some ingredients like sweeteners that other people have no problem with, but they do affect you or could affect you. And then I'm a whole foods person, but I also occasionally will eat keto products if traveling or something and I need one. So if you want to see how a certain keto product affects you, you can do this test. So the way to test is to make sure that you haven't had anything to eat for at least 3 hours before, and then test before you eat the food or ingredient in question and have a normal amount of the food. Don't have a huge amount, but also don't just have a taste of it. You really want to see how your body's reacting to a standard amount of food. So test before eating the food and then test again 1 hour later to see how much your ketones go down and your glucose goes up. And then test again 3 hours after eating so you can see if your glucose and ketone levels have returned to baseline. And the way that you evaluate it is the ketones should not decrease by more than 1 millimole per liter. They're going to decrease. They always decrease when you eat, but they shouldn't decrease by more than 1 millimole per liter at that 1 hour mark. And by 3 hours after eating, they should return to baseline. And your blood glucose shouldn't increase by more than 30 milligrams per deciliter, which is 1.7 millimole per liter, and it should return to baseline by 3 hours. If you eat the food and you see much more of a drop in ketones than that, or an increase in glucose, or it takes a long time to get back to baseline, that might not be a great food for you. You may want to eat a much smaller amount, or just, keep it for a very occasional eating if it's something that you really enjoy. But you may just want to cut it out altogether if it's really not working very well for you metabolically. How often you should test. People ask me this all the time, and I think it's very individual. I do think at the beginning, testing a lot can give you information to help you really fine-tune and personalize your diet, because you can see, really how foods are affecting you and what you need to do to get into that level of ketosis that's best for you. So testing twice a day, once in the morning, a little bit after you've woken up, and then once in the late afternoon. Or, if that's not convenient for you, then testing before lunch is also another option. But then after you know what you need to do to be in ketosis and get to the level you want to be, you can test a lot less frequently. Some people will want to continue to test every day. If you're doing this for a mental health condition where you need to be in therapeutic ketosis, you may very well want to check every day. But other people can, kind of know how they're feeling and get by with just testing once a week or a couple times a week. It really depends on the person. And then, of course, you can always occasionally test if you suspect that there's a food or ingredient that's causing a problem. So I'm just going to go over our MyMojoHealth app. For those of you that are not using it, if you're testing your ketones with our meter and our strips, that's great. But the MyMojoHealth app is just, I can't imagine not having it, to be honest with you, if you're testing, because it really keeps all of your data there in a way that you can look back. You can look day to day, you can look week to week. It gives you so much information. I already mentioned that it calculates the GKI for you, but it also allows you to see all of the data in different forms, in charts and graphs, in just lists, or however you want to see it. And it's also connects to other apps. So if you use Apple Health, for instance, you can see that information on your MyMojoHealth app. Also, if you are working with a practitioner and they have a MyMojoHealth dashboard, help you to get that targeted, and they'll see it right away. So this, I think, is really invaluable. It's also 100% free. Our meter, of course, is a one-time purchase, and the strips are a recurring purchase, but this one is 100% free, and we're always trying to improve it as well. So we're getting more and more features. I think it now connects to an Oura ring and also the Withings scale. So yeah. And then this is just different ways you can look at the data. So at the top there is both the glucose and ketones graphed. So you can see there's a lot of changes there. And you can kind of look back on what was going on that one day where I had such a drop in ketones. But then, of course, it kind of righted itself. And as it goes up, you can see that overall the trend is getting better. And then you can also look in bar charts if you like to look at the data that way. Or if you just like to see the data just in a list, you can look at it that way as well. So these are all features of the MyMojoHealth app. And I think that's it. Okay, good. This is about the time I thought it would be. So thank you. And I would love to take your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Franziska. I think this was very informative, very helpful, straight to the point, really easy to understand. And you hit some of the major points, I think, that people may wonder. So thank you for sharing with us. So anyone who has a question, or if you guys would like to engage in a discussion, feel free to raise your hand and and have your camera on if you can. And then I'm going to ask you to unmute. Or you can also put your questions in the chat if you prefer that way. So we're gonna start with Derek. Franziska, he's asking if there are any evidence that a ketogenic diet helps symptoms of ADHD.
That's a great question. I think there is a case study. I know there, in fact, is a case study on ADHD that has shown that. And there's definitely a lot of anecdotal evidence. I also know, because at Keto-Mojo we work with trials, I know there's an upcoming trial that's going to be looking at ADHD and depression. So that's an actual clinical trial. So I would say there is evidence, but it's mainly anecdotal evidence right now and case reports. But that's what's really important. That's how these trials get done, is there are more and more people reporting positive effects from using the diet. And then we have the case reports, and then we have clinical trials that get funded because people are interested. So I would say it can probably help you or whoever you're asking about. I would just always say that it's important to just go slowly. And if you have never done ketogenic therapy before, I always recommend working with a practitioner. I think it's just so much better to have somebody really knowledgeable giving you feedback and helping you personalize it.
Definitely, yeah, always the case. And also, Derek, if you're interested, check out Transformation Evoke YouTube channel. There is an interview there with Natasha, who has explained her results with dealing with ADHD symptoms and utilizing the ketogenic diets, which are pretty phenomenal. So yes, as Franziska said, we're at this point, we're just relying on people's experiences, which is the starting point, and hopefully we'll get to see some more evidence. And then, Franziska, another question that I get a lot is in terms of people that have issues with liver, specifically elevated enzymes. A lot of the medications are causing that, as we know. Do you have any input in terms of whether that is that keto should be implemented in the therapeutic ranges that we discussed in those cases, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really depends on the reason for the liver, the elevation in liver enzymes. Again, this is where I really want them to work with a practitioner. But generally speaking, keto should not cause elevations in like ALT, AST, or anything like that. It usually is medication or another condition that's causing it. Of course, alcohol can also cause it. So many different things can affect liver enzymes. Overall, ketogenic diets are being shown more and more beneficial for fatty liver. So I would say generally it's safe, but always work with a doctor or a practitioner, just because I'm not sure exactly what is affecting the liver and causing that. But if you're following a healthy diet with, I would say a high-fat diet that's got moderate or adequate protein is healthy for just about everybody, but always work with a doctor as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And in terms of supplements, do you have your go-to supplements that you generally recommend to anyone who is long-term keto? Um, as far as I know, and you let me know if that is what you're aware of as well. Dr. Chris Palmer has mentioned that it usually takes between 2 to 5 years for the therapeutic effects to really take place in order for someone to be able to potentially discontinue the diet or transition to some other form of it. But during that time, since that is a long-term way of living, do you have what are your insights in terms of what are some non-negotiable supplements, since we're cutting up quite a few groups of foods, and also specifically maybe L-carnitine, if you can talk a little bit more about that. I know a lot of people at some point have to deal with that.
Yeah, great question. So let's start with carnitine first, because the ketogenic, just being in ketosis requires a lot. You need to have a certain level of carnitine, and some people have a naturally lower level that is not a problem, but when they go on a ketogenic diet, it becomes a problem. They need to supplement. So I think always checking, as a dietitian, I would always check carnitine before someone starts and then periodically while they're on the diet. The good thing about the diet, if you eat animal foods, is that lamb and red meat are pretty high in carnitine, but some people still need a supplement on top of that. And then again, monitoring the levels. And I would say, as far as what needs to be supplemented, it really depends on the person and their diet, the individual. So looking at lab values is important, but also looking at the diet. The great thing about ketogenic diet is it can meet most people's nutrition needs, but some people have higher nutrition needs just as their own, like their unique physiology. I personally, and I know a lot of people are like this, need to supplement magnesium. And it's not just because I'm on a ketogenic diet, although, yes, there's not a lot of very high or good sources of magnesium on a keto diet. So taking magnesium, and electrolytes at the beginning during the keto flu transition, so potassium and sodium as well. I would say vitamin D, but that's really true for everybody. And then everyone else, I would really, I would do a full diet history and then also check values to see where they're at, because they don't always need to supplement, even though you're cutting out a lot. If you eat meat and eggs, vegetables, fatty fish, you're pretty much getting everything. Even vitamin C, which, how much vitamin C we really need is also debatable, especially when you're on a ketogenic or even a carnivore diet. How much vitamin C you need, your body may be able to get by with much less, but you're still going to get some from the foods that you eat. So I think it's just so individual, and I don't really see nutrient deficiencies if people are truly following a well-formulated diet and not, if it's very, very high in fat. I think with children on like a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 diet, where they have to eat so much fat to get their ketone levels up to the very high ranges, they can be at risk, especially since they're growing. But I think for adults, I usually don't see people needing to supplement too much other than carnitine, calcium sometimes, actually, depending on how much dairy they have. But I do it very like individual basis in terms of supplementation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Another thing that I know people are dealing with a lot is going to be resetting or troubleshooting once they have gone off the diet for whatever reason. Again, it's a long-term strategy, and potentially at some point people experience issues with eating something that they were not supposed to, or whatever the case may be. And once they get out of the diet, what are your top suggestions based on experience and just your practice to recommend as the quickest, safest way to get back into therapeutic levels and feel better again?
Yes, very good question. I say just really just go back to basics. If I don't know exactly how long they've been off. Unfortunately, the longer you've been off, the harder it is to get back on track sometimes, and the harder it might be to get back into ketosis. If it hasn't been for very long and you've been in ketosis for a while, you can snap back pretty quickly. It really depends on the person. But of course, I recommend, just being aware that you may get the symptoms of keto flu again. So to be really careful about electrolytes, and just, embracing again that, on this diet, you can eat, all the fat that you need to feel full, to feel good, that you get to eat protein and, just really relish I don't know, there's the nourishment about it. Most people, it is tough. I understand. I know. And I've been doing the diet myself I didn't say this in the introduction, but since 2011, not a strict, very strict form, but I find that it's just so nourishing and I feel so good that makes me easy. So I think just really motivating people, like, remember how you felt when you were on this, and remember those foods that you like. Let's get out some of the old recipes that are working for you. Let's look for some new things, just make it really appealing. And then, I think the getting back on the horse is the hardest, but once they're in it and they start to feel better, it's pretty easy to stay on it until they're tempted again by something.
Yeah, and it's part of the journey, but yeah, I agree that that having that clear why and how we felt, I feel like everyone who has touched that sense of well-being, like just regulated mood, or most of us here are using it for mental health, and just being able to get a hold of that condition, whatever it is, once, you cannot unsee it. You do not forget it, and just reconnecting as time goes with that feeling is really a good motivator to get you back on track. And I love what you said there, that you reminding yourself of your favorite foods. I continuously encourage people to enjoy type of a diet. It can be so, it actually allows a lot of variety and can be enjoyable, in my opinion, and really easy to stick to if you are committed enough and willing to work with it. So
Yeah, exactly.
awesome. And then Deidre is asking, what suggestions do you have for someone who is maintaining carbs to 2050 per day, but are running higher glucose and only trace ketones for prolonged basis?
Okay, so eating 20 to 50 grams of total carbs per day or net carbs per day? It doesn't really matter because if the carb content, if their blood glucose is high, and I'm assuming they're talking about fasting blood glucose, not their after eating blood glucose, and it's running high, and ketones are not where they need to be, that generally means the carbs might need to come down a bit, because 20 to 50, maybe if it's closer to 20, that would be fine. But 50, a lot of people would not really be at, optimal levels of ketosis with that much. So I'm going to say cut back a bit on that. And then I don't know exactly what you're eating, but, raising the fat actually, can be a problem too, is that people aren't eating enough fat because we've been conditioned that too much fat is bad and we really shouldn't eat that much. But on a ketogenic diet, that's where your energy is coming from. That is your energy source. Your protein you're not really using for energy. You're minimizing carbs. So you really do need to make sure you're getting enough fat for energy needs. So that's what I would recommend. Also, just make sure that you're testing, at the appropriate times. If you're testing in the morning, remember to wait a little while so the levels of cortisol and everything can get out of your system. And then also know that other things besides food can affect you, including stress, not sleeping well, medications in some case as well.
Thank you so much. Perfect. And then Chris, you have a question, so I'm going to ask you to unmute and you can ask your question.
Hi, great presentation first and foremost. That was excellent. You're really good at communicating this stuff. Let's see. Any signs in the future that somebody like Keto-Mojo might add some other things to that, like being able to test for inflammatory markers or oxidative stress or lactate, any of these things?
Possibly. In the future, we might. At this point, I think the app is being built to be able to track those things that come in from other data sources. So if you're tracking lactate, that you'd be able to see it. I don't think at this point we have plans to monitor any of the biomarkers, but possibly in the future. But thank you for the question, and thank you so much for the very nice feedback. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for your presentation. That was really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And you had a question as well?
Yes, thank you for the presentation, first of all. And I have a question. I've been on the diet like very strictly for now a bit less than 3 months for depression and anxiety. So for now, I have like tiny windows of peace, which is new, but I don't like, I know it's a long journey. But my question is related to hunger. Like I feel that I eat good, but I still feel like hungry often during the day. And then I try to, when I increase a bit my proteins, it drops my ketones. When I increase my fat, because I'm like 150 grams maybe of fat or 160 now every day. When I put more fat, I feel it decrease my ketones too. So do you have any advice about like how to eat for that?
Yeah, so is there a specific time of the day that you're getting hungry, or is it just you have a low level of hunger kind of all day?
Yeah, kind of all day, yeah.
Okay. I do think sometimes it can just take a little while to get used to it. Generally, eating more fat will not decrease your ketones. I mean, if you test right afterwards, they might go down, but generally eating more fat, if your ketones are low and if you're hungry, I would recommend probably eating more fat. I don't know exactly how much protein you're eating. You said if you eat too much, but maybe it's eating, and are you eating like twice a day? Or are you eating 3 times a day? You're doing intermittent fasting at all? Did
Yes,
you?
so sorry. So I eat like one time at lunch, so at noon, and then I have like a snack at 3, and then I have dinner at maybe 6.
Mhm.
I do like between 1,700 and 2,000 calories, and I feel that my max proteins is 90 grams.
I think that's not, I'm not going to ask you too many personal questions about how much you are, but 90 grams is probably like the max for, you know, a lot of women who are on a ketogenic diet, unless they're very tall. So that's good. And I'm glad actually, my concern sometimes with ketogenic diets is people skimp on protein, in order to drive their ketone levels up and they're not meeting their needs. So I think 90 grams is good. You know, you possibly eat a little bit less than that and you would be okay too. But in terms of the calories are probably fine. Maybe you need, you know, a little more to be kind of more at the upper level. Just, you know, if just I would say add a little more fat at your meals and hopefully that will help with the hunger. Also make sure you're getting enough to drink as well. I mean, sometimes being thirsty, even though we don't perceive it as that, it can be a matter of not being hydrated enough, has us reaching for food because our brain is just thinking it needs something, but actually it might be a little bit dehydrated as well. And that can happen on a ketogenic diet, especially if you're not doing a lot of vegetables, which have a lot of water in them. So maybe also looking at your drinking as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck. I'm so glad to hear that you're doing this and you've been doing 3 months already. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Anne. Franziska, with respect to your time, I know we're getting closer to the 1 hour mark, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts in terms of the future of this therapeutic approach as someone who is heavily involved in the research and the practical application and all of that. How do you feel about the future application and where do you see all this movement going with metabolic psychiatry and more? You spoke about cancer and we know already about the diabetes, epilepsy, and all of it.
Yeah, no, I think that there are just I can't believe in 5 years, I think we're going to look back on this time and say, wow, we were just in our infancy because of the Bazooki Group, they are funding so much research in many different areas. And as I said, because I'm at Keto-Mojo and we're involved in supplying strips, I know about a lot of these research coming up and it's very exciting. So many different things are exploring. They're looking at heart failure. They're looking for it um, in eating disorders. They're testing it in. We have one person that's looking at like long COVID, ketogenic diets for dysautonomia, and things. Gosh, yeah, I think that there are just so many different applications that yeah, in 5 years, there might be some others that I can't even think of right now. But in the field of metabolic psychiatry, we're just so lucky that there are so many wonderful practitioners. You mentioned Chris Palmer. I think probably everyone knows he just opened up his institute where they're actually going to be seeing people. They have a whole staff that are trained to help people. There's a long waiting list to get in. You have to live in Massachusetts, but it's so exciting. And yeah, I'm just really very eager to see where all the research goes and really hope that it can help people who, you know, have kind of given up hope and they're just so heavily medicated and just thinking that their life is only going to get worse when, you know, this could potentially be life-changing for them.
Absolutely, yes. As Dr. Georgia Eid says, hope is on the menu. I just love that.
Yeah. Oh, and she's another one. I absolutely love Georgia. No, that's the thing. Everyone in the metabolic health space is so amazing. So yeah.
Yeah. And you as well. I really appreciate your input, the thoughtful content. Extremely helpful, especially for beginners. Keto-Mojo is a wonderful resource. I always recommend it. You guys have meal plans and tons of info on how to do this properly. So I really appreciate your time and everything you contribute to the field as well, and for showing up tonight, for sharing such a helpful and insightful presentation with us all. Thank you, and we'll hope to continue seeing progress with those interventions moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donica. Thank you for your great work. And thank you all so much, all of you who spent your time here tonight listening to me. I appreciate it. And yeah, check out Keto-Mojo and, you know, maybe I'll come back another time sometime and talk. It would be fun.
Love that. We would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.